Hi, welcome to Perfectly Frank. I'm Frank Dominic, and today I am joined by the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, Bonnie Crombie. Hi, how's it going?
Hey Frank, yeah, it's a grind. 3 more days to go though, so I'm every vote counts. We're still at it.
And that's the thing. I mean, it's admirable to see how much time and effort people put into a campaign, not just the leaders, but also like I'm sure that your assistants, your aides, your volunteers, these are people who are like pounding the pavement and they're working like 10, 12-hour volunteering days. You must be surrounded by like some good people, right?
Oh, I have the best people, and they're so bright and they're so energetic, and they have the best ideas. And we have different crews of people. Everyone in the head office who does all the comms and the digital media stuff, and the team around me when we're traveling on the bus or traveling, even by plane to other destinations. Like this weekend was Ottawa. I was in Ottawa for announcements and a rally. Came back to Toronto this afternoon and made some pit stops in some of the campaign offices of some of the candidates. It was terrific. They're long days, they're grueling days. Sometimes they pick me up at 5 and 6 a.m. Sometimes I'm doing media, early morning radio, early morning breakfast TV. And then here, look, tonight, I do late night interviews as well.
Well, I mean, you gotta. I've got little kids. It's the only time I can do it, so I appreciate you making the time. I
Oh,
heard
yeah,
that
no
on your.
problem.
I heard that on your when you're traveling, one of the artists in your playlist is Chapel Roan. Is that correct?
Oh, gosh. Yes. We're all huge Chapel Roan fans now,
I find
Good
it
luck,
interesting.
babe. And I mean, we joke about Feminine Phenomenon and, all those other songs we shouldn't mention really, but
Well, I find it interesting because like she really strikes me as like a Gen Z, Gen Alpha coded like Madonna type figure. But whenever I
I
say that, some
agree.
people get offended. But like it's just like that's the vibes I get. She's like very like liberated and powerful, and she doesn't care what other people think.
Absolutely. And where we have a girl bus, we call it the feminine phenomenon, right? Don't get me wrong, I really love rock and roll too, and I'm a huge Triumph fan.
Oh,
And of
okay.
course, they're Mississauga based, and they love Tom. They're friends with Tom Cochrane, so he's a friend, and we love his music too. We love lots of less girl music, but Coldplay and Fleetwood Mac too. I love lots of music. I love music. It's always
Now,
on in the background.
if you want to talk about the best Mississauga band, and you might disagree with me on this one, but the best band to ever come out of Mississauga is Billy Talent, and I
Billy
will.
Talent. I
Right.
knew you were going to say Billy Talent, but
Who comes
they're
better?
fabulous. I agree. George Strombolopoulos is a Malton boy from Mississauga too, right?
It's there's something about the something in the water with music. It
The
just
Water and Saga.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one
Lots
of
of
the things
incredible talent, lots of great artists, visual artists as well. Performing artists and visual artists. I love this city. I'm so proud of it and everyone who's come out of here.
there's a lot of really, and that's the thing. So like Ontario has a lot of really cool small cities with different vibes. Like whether it's Hamilton, whether it's Kitchener, whether it's Mississauga. You go up north. Northern Ontario has this kind of
Paris,
a whole.
Ontario, Kincardine, like Almont, where a lot of movies, all the Hallmark movies are filmed in Almont or in
Okay,
Paris,
I've heard
Ontario.
about that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So and that's the thing. So everywhere you go in Ontario, you get uh, different vibes, but it's there's a
Have
same
you ever been to
underlying.
Moonbeam? Have you ever been to Moonbeam?
No,
Up near
what's
Kappus Casing in Timmins, there's this like UFO, and they call the town Moonbeam over this big UFO station there. I've been there on the tours.
That's awesome. So, but the thing is, like, so even though everybody, even though there's a different type of like kind of vibe or personality to each city, everyone has the same underlining currents of like what we need and what we want right now. So, what I want to kind of lead with is like, I know personally for me, I think about housing, I think about healthcare, but like, if you were to say like, what's your number one thing right now when it comes to the policy that you care about the most and that's on your mind all the time, like, what is the thing that drives you?
Healthcare. It's family docs. When I think about the 2.5 million people in Ontario that don't have a family doctor, what that does is drive up wait times in hospitals. Doug Ford said he'd end hallway healthcare. He didn't get it done. He also said he'd cut our taxes. He didn't get that done. And then he said he'd build 1.5 million homes. He didn't get that done either. But seriously, the most important thing for me is ensure that we get the basics right here in Ontario, because you can't even grow the economy until we know we have adequate health care, right? That people have housing that they can afford, that we don't have gridlock and congestion on our streets. You can't bring in investment and grow businesses if you don't get the fundamentals right. And so for me, it's the fundamentals. It's about everyone having a family doctor. And that's our number one promise. In addition to building capacity, hiring more doctors, nurses, PSWs, and paying them properly. And I'll say the third pillar of that is mental health care. And I firmly believe, because of my history, that mental health should be covered under OHIP. It should be covered under Medicare. I mean, it's pretty simple to me. What we see, and you're a teacher, Frank, so you see the kids struggling. They seem to have a lot of anxiety, eating disorders, mental health issues. Suicide rate is so high, particularly in some of the more remote northern communities. That's something we need to deal with as a community, as a society. This is a failure on us. And so we want to ensure that everyone has the mental health help that they need. And you may well know that I'm a product of a father who had mental health issues and addiction issues, and he and my mom split up. And as a result, I was raised by my grandparents and my mom in a rooming house in the High Park area in Toronto. And I didn't see him for 40 years of my life. And then one day, I got a call from the Seton House that he was failing and he wanted to see me. And I didn't even know he was there. And I really thank the Seton House. They're a men's shelter in Toronto, and they gave him counseling and gave him the wraparound services that he needed. And it was there for him at the end of his life. And so we need more of that supportive housing for our homeless people who need that kind of housing with the wraparound services that they need. Because I mean, I think we probably both know people who have functioning addiction issues, and they want help, but they can't get it. You know, either they can't afford it or there are long wait times in the public facilities. So we've got to ensure that everyone who wants treatment because they have an addiction has access to it.
Well, that's so one of the things that you touched on, you were talking about your personal story. I wanted to ask you about that simply because, not to draw parallels between you and Ford, but Ford
Yeah,
has a firsthand knowledge of what it's like to have a loved one suffer from addiction. Ford has firsthand knowledge to see
yeah,
what happens when it
yeah.
can ruin a life. And so, um, do you? I've made this comment before, and I'm not sure if you see it a different way, but it shocks me that Ford can go through 60 years of life and not seem to develop any empathy, talking about being tough on crime, but in the way that he says it, it seems to be that everybody who is below him isn't deserving of a helping hand up. Whereas I've heard
Right,
the liberals talk about a little bit about being a little tougher on crime, but also you have this empathetic side where you're talking about the importance of
right.
getting people help
Well,
with
we
addiction.
can't. So, Frank, you can't criminalize homeless people or people with addictions. They are people who need help. This is a failure on society that we aren't giving making the help available for them. You know, and you know, maybe he hasn't come to terms with his brother's addiction issues. It took a long time. You know, I got to get permission from my mother to talk about it. I wanted people to know because for her it was very stigmatizing. It's something we hid and we didn't talk about. My mother later remarried. I grew up with an adopted dad and a home in Etobicoke, and we had a very loving family, but we didn't talk about that era. For her, it was it was traumatic and a bad experience, and it was very stigmatizing. So I said to her, "Today it's different, Mom. We have to talk about these experiences and learn from them, and ensure that other people get the help that they need."
I think, and so I really do appreciate that you're speaking up on that because I think it does
Yeah,
allow simultaneously it's the vulnerability and it's also the acknowledgement
right.
that these are things that we have to talk about. On a
Yeah.
maybe on a brighter note, I want to know something. When it comes to the future of Ontario, when it comes to the future of like positive minded policies, like I know healthcare needs to be fixed, I know housing needs to be fixed. Outside of the things that are broken, what are some forward thinking policies, or at least one that you can think to yourself, this is a really cool thing that we can do, and it'll put us in a better place than most of other parts of Canada, or maybe even parts of the world.
How? You know, housing. We got to make sure people have housing. And I only say that because we have one of the most aggressive and, not widely lauded programs that really cuts down the cost of building and reduces the price of housing that, you know, all the experts seem to be in favor of. And how do you do it? You reduce the price of real estate, you find surplus land to build housing on, but then you eliminate development charges, which end up being those hidden taxes on homes, right? And the developers, it makes it cheaper for them to build, but it makes it cheaper for the end purchaser, the home buyer, to afford as well. And so it's it was a challenge I put forward to my team because I know as a former mayor, we ended up relying on development charges as a source of revenue. So we got to make the cities whole, and we do that by paying them out of the province. So we reallocate the Ontario Building Fund to the Better Communities Fund. We make the cities whole. We reduce the cost of building to the developers and the price of homes to people. And you know what goes a long way? We also cancel the land transfer tax for anyone who's a senior or a first-time home buyer or a charity. We have phased in rent controls. We got to build more supportive housing. We need to do it, with those community experts and incentivize them to do it. And then to help the most vulnerable as well, we double the ODSP because they're not even surviving today, Frank, and I want people to thrive.
So yeah, I mean, like,
And the other thing I'll say is, what's really progressive about us, and that's why I always like to say I'm a different kind of liberal, I'm a different kind of leader, because, yeah, I want to give everyone a doctor, and I believe in fiscal responsibility, but I'm also offering a tax cut. Not only a small business tax cut, we're going to cut them in half, but a personal income tax cut, and we're going to take the HST off home heating and hydro, and that'll put $1,150 back in your pocket. So we're trying to make life more affordable for people. And that's all of getting the basics right. And you can't, as I said to you, grow the economy because you can't attract investments into cities where, their employees can't afford the housing, they can't afford the rent, groceries are out of reach, you can't get a family doctor, the wait times in hospitals are too long, and then of course we have a congestion and gridlock problem. So who wants to come here? It's been an abysmal failure over the past 7 years. I would say that Doug Ford has not addressed the basics, but he focuses on things where big companies, big corporations, big box companies benefit, right? And we see a lot of waste in the government. In fact, I'll point out to you that he put 1.8 billion in his health plan, but he gave 2.1 billion to Therma Spa at Ontario Place. It's just unconscionable to me. He gave us checks for they're valued at $3 billion. My healthcare plan is $3 billion as well. And I'm sure knowing that people would put that money into healthcare. It's nice to get a check, but it's a one-time check. It'll help you for 1 month. Our plan will cut your taxes and make life affordable during the year as well.
yeah, I mean, so you mentioned the $3 billion that we spent on the province spent on those checks, and like I was kind of running the numbers. $3 billion can do quite a lot of things. It can solve most of the backlog that we have in terms of schools that need repairs.
Yeah.
It can end homelessness depending on the type of program that people decide to institute. There's a lot of these things that we could do, and I know that money doesn't just
And it
make
was just
problems go away.
waste in the system. Frank, it was waste in the system. Just like bringing beer and wine to the corner stores a year early. It was coming. Nobody opposed it coming. But to make it, speed it up, expedite it for 1 year
Spend
cost
that
$2
money.
billion. $2 billion that went into, those big beer companies, into the corner stores, and into those big boxes and the 7-Elevens. Like it always seems to be about the Walmarts and the Staples and the 7-Elevens because I think the premier's buddies with those CEOs.
Well, and when they, I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. And when they decided to speed up the alcohol rollout, one thing that I noticed is that I started seeing a lot of videos of alcohol being stolen from corner stores because I feel as though a lot of these places weren't prepared. There was a video that came out of Halton Region where there were students who had one group of boys had distracted the store clerk, and then a bunch of girls just picked up some cases of like twisted tea or something and sprinted off in the other direction. And you got to wonder,
Huh.
like why are we enabling a system that people aren't even ready for regardless of the prices? So when it comes to the
Yeah.
implementation of like good policy, I just one thing I wanted to ask you was, is there something specific that you look at? Like Doug is talking about, like you mentioned tax cuts, and Doug's talking about like making alcohol cheaper. Is there anything else that we can look at that we can do starting on day one under a liberal government that can start making things better in the province?
Well, obviously for me, it's investing in attracting more doctors here and retaining the doctors we have. But, I just want to say that nobody asked me to ensure that there was a six pack there for them when they were filling up their gas in their car, right? They've asked me to get them a family doctor. Everyone asked me, do you know anyone who might be registering a new doctor? That's the number one asks. And Bonnie, why do we have to wait in our hospital so long? Well, that's easy because you don't have a family doctor who you would normally go to so you're going for non-critical, non-emergency issues right into the ER because you don't have a choice. Doug Ford was blaming people. Too many people going to the ERs. Well, Doug, That's your fault. That's not their fault. They don't have a
You can't go to a
choice.
family doctor. You got to go somewhere.
You can't go to a family doctor. You got to go somewhere. My daughter had to wait 2 weeks to get an appointment at a walk-in clinic just because she had hives. Can you believe it? That's the state of our healthcare system. And this is Canada. This is Ontario. This is Doug Ford's Ontario. 1,000 people lined up in a snowstorm for 6 hours to register for one doctor in
That was in
Walkerton.
Walkerton, right? Yeah, I
In
could not
Walkerton.
believe, I could not believe that.
I
Absolutely
know,
insane.
it's shocking. That's Doug Ford's Ontario, where you prioritize the sale of beer and wine and big box companies over healthcare and tax cuts. It's abysmal for me. And when you look at the waste, the 2 billion that went into the beer and wine, we called it the booze doggle. The 2 billion that went to the Thermos Spa, the 3 billion in the pre-election checks is what they were. That's 7 billion right there. We also saw the abrupt closure of the Science Center. The Science Center, by the way, he claimed that the roof would collapse under a big snowstorm. Well, we've had a big snowstorm. The
Still
roof is
there.
still there, Doug. So why'd you close it? Why'd you close the Science Center? And then moving all those Service Ontario into Staples and wherever else, Walmarts. Plus, they paid for the to put in the kiosks. They never did that when they were small business franchises. They closed all those small businesses. It's utter contempt is what he treats the
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 average
people of
person so they
Ontario.
can give more money to the corporations. Um,
That's right. It's all
one
about those big CEOs.
so with the election coming up and people who didn't vote in early elections or the early advanced polling, they're starting to think, okay, the time is coming. What do I do? You made a pitch during the leader debate for people
Yeah,
on the NDP to vote for the Liberal Party in order to make sure that we avoided a Ford government. I understand
yeah,
that you guys have been doing your best to appeal to a wide range of people,
yeah.
but what do you say to the people who every single time there's an election they say, oh, like I have to vote Liberal this time, I have to vote Liberal this time. Some people want to vote their heart, but they want to also get rid of Ford. What can you say to those people
Right.
to convince them that
Well,
you are the right
you
choice?
know, some people call it strategic voting. If you want to get rid of Ford, you got to look to see who's got the wind in their sails. And right now, we're the ones with momentum. My pitch is simple. If you want a family doctor, you got to vote out this government. You need to change the government, and then you need to vote Ontario Liberal. It's very, very simpler. If you voted for another party in the past, I'm asking to loan your vote this one time so that we can change the government, so that we can ensure you have not only a tax cut, a home that's affordable, but a family doctor and lower wait times in our hospital. That's my pitch. We got 3 days to make it happen. So I'm really pumped up, and I really hope people give it a lot of thought. They give it a lot of thought. This is a premier who in the times of crisis supports an American president who is waging a trade war against us, who known to him was going to impose punitive tariffs. This is the guy. He stood up and he said, I support him. I think this election was called in the dead of winter in the coldest and shortest month because, quite frankly, he's trying to outrun an RCMP investigation. You know what? He's not there at his desk doing his job, protecting our jobs. He's only trying to protect his job. So let's vote him out. So please, if you want a family doctor and a tax cut and homes that are affordable, vote Ontario Liberal on Thursday, February 27th.
So one thing that I've asked Jugmeat Singh when I interviewed him, Mart Stiles, I asked Mike Schreiner this, um, because at the end of the day,
First,
we're asking for people's votes, but one
yeah.
thing that is supported by, according to an Ecos poll that occurred last year, I think it's about 68% of Canadians support some form of electoral reform, specifically proportional representation. Where does the Ontario Liberal Party fall in terms of their views on electoral reform?
Yeah, so I'm all about, I believe in ranked ballots. We have to do them, obviously, when you run for leader or in nomination races, not a problem. But this is something that should be taken out of elected officials' hands. There's almost an inherent conflict of interest to have us decide those matters. So let's take it over to a group of citizens. Like I know there's a citizens assembly that has proposed this, and let's have, or an independent body, review this and make recommendations. Because, for me, it's kind of like, well, what would you like? Well, of course I like first past the post, right? So let's have an independent group look at it and make some recommendations back to us. I know there are some flaws with some other systems. We know that with mixed member proportional representation, for example, you end up with a lot of parties and you have to create these big coalitions, which may work in some countries and others, slows down legislation. But you know what? Let's take it outside and let a citizen group look at it and bring back some recommendations.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense because, as you were saying, everybody always wants to do what's in their own best interest. But if we put it in the
That's
hands of
right.
the people, there's no better form of democracy than letting the people decide.
That's right. It's better democracy. So we put it in their hands and let them decide. And, otherwise we have a little bit of a conflict of interest about with it, right?
It's much. It's just a little bit. The last thing that I wanted to leave off on um, is at the end of the day, this election is just like the last two, going to be consequential, regardless of if another election is called in 2 years, if Doug thinks that he's, or whoever else that thinks that they want to call an early election, or if it goes for
Yeah.
4 years and we don't have to worry about it. Over the next 4 years, the government is going to have to work together, whether it's a minority government or a majority government, whoever's in power, liberals, conservatives, it doesn't matter. How do you view working with other parties? Like, let's just say you won a majority government. Would
Yeah.
you still be interested in working with other parties
Well,
to ensure a smoother democracy, a democratic
so
system?
it's a great question. And, because I have the background of being a mayor and I'm a huge consensus builder, when we make important decisions, I like to go around the table and say, I want to know your thoughts and your thoughts and your thoughts. And, do we have a consensus here? Can we come to some sort of agreement? And we have such profound issues to deal with right now. The state of our economy, jobs are leaving, the highest unemployment rate in a decade, right? No one has access to a family doctor, and wait times are 22 hours. You could get to Winnipeg faster. So we need to work together. And sometimes we may need to make subcommittees that are made of people from different parties to get things done. We've seen that elsewhere work very effectively. It's called a wartime effort to get things done.
And I think that makes sense because we are heading towards a future that looks a little wartime-ish.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
I'm really glad you took
Very
the time.
uncertain times. And what we need is stability and certainty, not an election. But here we are, 3 days
Exactly.
to election day. It's
I'm
not the
really
time
glad.
I would have
And
picked.
that's the thing. We're so close to the election day, and it's late. It's dark outside, as you can see in the background. I really do appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Thanks very
Um,
much for having me. I love chatting with you, Frank. I'm a big fan. Sorry to be a fangirl. You rock, and we'll keep following you. Thanks very much for this opportunity.
And don't forget to get out and vote this Thursday. And we can only hope for a better future for Ontario.
Thank you. Let's change the government. Let's do it together.